I think poetry is oftentimes something that we don't think about much anymore. Mike Meredith, who's in the audience, who has been an English teacher over many years, said it was the favorite thing that he taught his students. I was not someone that seemed to take to poetry, but I've come to appreciate it as I've gotten older and older and older. I do have two poets in my family. One is my wife, who's never probably even shared her poetry, but she writes all the time. And I asked her, why do you write poetry? She said, it's the language of the heart, and the heart needs expression. I have a son who is a poet and has published poetry, most of which I can't understand. He said, poetry is not just one sentence after another. The spaces between the words speak. The spaces between the lines speak. You can hear the silence, and you can't get to the truth without that silence. So Dennis and I are supposed to read a poem as part of this self-flagellation, I guess. I noted, and I don't note much about poetry, that Mary Oliver died this year. She was 83 years old, and she was the poet laureate. She had received a Pulitzer Prize for poetry. She received a National Book Award for poetry, and countless prizes. And I actually have read some of her poems and have a favorite poem by her. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Mary Oliver because she's so amazing. It's often not known that she has two themes. One is nature, and one is expressions of grief and trauma. Those have sort of been through her poetry, which is extensive. She was sexually abused as a child. She came from a very unhappy home life, a sexually abusive father, and neglectful mother. And this is a quote, "It was a very dark and broken house that I came from. I was very little, but I had recurring nightmares, and there is damage." And she wrote about that through her poetry. Mary Cuman, writing in the Women's Review of Books, said her poetry stands quite comfortably on the margin of things, on the line between earth and sky, the think membrane that separates human from what we loosely call animal. And that whole being on the edge of nature and observing was one of the things that Mary Oliver is noted for. And Rachel Simon, the New Yorker, writing about her death, said for more than 5 decades, she gave voice to the process of confronting one's dark places, of peering beneath toadstools and into stagnant ponds, and when she looked, she found forgiveness and she found grace. So I think those are two things that are sort of emblematic of her poetry. So her most famous, or at least well-known poem, is Wild Geese. That's the one I was familiar with. And the last few lines go like this. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination. It calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. But I'm going to read a little bit longer poem that when I came across it preparing for this, it really spoke to me personally. So in terms of a favorite poem, this really spoke to me. As someone who's 70 years old and who is enjoying my life, this said a lot. And it's called When Death Comes. When death comes like the hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and takes all the bright coins from his purse to buy me and snaps the purse shut, when death comes like the measles pox, when death comes like an iceberg between the shoulder blades, I want to step through the door full of curiosity, wondering, what is it going to be like, that cottage of darkness? And therefore, I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood, and I look upon time as no more than an idea, and I consider eternity as another possibility. And I think of each life as a flower, as common as a field daisy, and as singular. And I think of each name a comfortable music in the mouth, tending as all music does towards silence. And each body a lion of courage and something precious to the earth. When it's over, I want to say, all my life, I was a bride, married to amazement. I was the bridegroom, taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. I found another quote that I would like to finish with. It's very simple. Mary Oliver says, "Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it." So, heading off, our very distinguished list of readers tonight is Bonnie Bowler. Where is Bonnie? We're doing this alphabetically, and you score twice with B's. So, Bonnie Bowler, and I'm not going to read these bios. They're interesting and they're very telling. And Bonnie Bowler has been an educator I've known for many, many years. And she's the only person I know that can quote Latin just off the cuff. She's someone over the years, our favorite question when we see each other is, what are you reading? She reads some pretty interesting stuff. And currently we are both volunteers at the Montana Historical Society. So welcome, Bonnie. Glad you're here.
I love that, married to amazement. Whoa. All right. I'm not going to read in Latin, by the way. Maybe just one or two lines. And since Joe talked for so long, maybe I will too. I have to outline the history of this poem. It was this poem was written during a tumultuous time in what we call Rome, just Rome, 2,000 years of whatever. And when Horace, the poet I'm reading, wrote this, Rome pretty much ran the Mediterranean. It was theirs. And they called it Mare Nostrum, our sea. Right, Luke? Do you remember that? Anyway, Julius Caesar, after conquering Gaul, returned to Rome, and when he did, he started a civil war because he crossed the Rubicon. And that was, the Senate said, no, you can't do that. And anyway, he and Pompey the Great, who was in Rome at the time, also his ex-son-in-law, and you can't make this stuff up. Pompey the Great was Caesar's ex-son-in-law, and Pompey took off, left all the money in the Senate treasury, and headed for Greece. And Julius Caesar chased him and defeated him. Pompey escaped from this battle and headed for Egypt, where he thought he would be safe, and he was murdered by the Ptolemy the 13th, who thought Caesar would like that. Well, he didn't at all. Now, Ptolemy the 13th was married to a woman, Cleopatra, his sister and his bride, and she will return later in this story. So Julius Caesar needed wheat, he needed money, Cleopatra needed protection, she needed his army, and so they met up, and there's that famous movie. And they got together, and they had a child, Caesarion. And Caesar was there for a while, and he went back to Rome, and she followed him a couple of years later, and the Romans hated her because she was an Oriental. She was from the East, and she was a woman, and they didn't know how to handle women leaders. And anyway, this is 44 BCE, okay? And you know what happened in 44 BCE. Caesar was killed, and his assassins took off, and I've lost her. And Mark Antony enters the picture. Well, Mark Antony had met Cleopatra, and supposedly he went to her ship and said goodbye to her. And she left for Alexandria, and he joined up with Octavian, who was Caesar's heir. Mark Antony thought he was going to be the heir, but he didn't quite make the cut. So he had to join up with Octavian, and so they chased Brutus and Cassius, the assassins, into Greece. Another battle in Greece, the Battle of Philippi, and they they were defeated. Both Cassius and Brutus committed suicide rather than be captured by Julius Caesar and be humiliated. And so then Mark Antony and Octavian split what was at that time still a republic, empire, sort of in between. And Octavian took the west and Mark Antony took the east. And so he went to Alexandria to find the money. And here's this woman who has a son by his best friend Julius Caesar, and he wants to get to know her. And of course, as you know, they fall in love and all of that. They had 3 children. So then there's going to be another battle. This is another battle in Greece, the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, and Mark Antony and Cleopatra are defeated, and they escape to Alexandria, and Octavian and his general Marcus Agrippa defeat them. So Cleopatra is in Alexandria, and meanwhile, back in Rome, there's a poet who is observing all this behavior, and his name was Quintus Horatius Flaccus, and he just comes out as Horace in the poetry books. And a little bit about him. He was born in Apulia, which is in the heel of the boot of Italy, and his father was a freedman, but a very well-to-do freedman. And Horace made a political mistake early on in his career because he was studying in Athens when Cassius or Brutus were escaping from Caesar, and he joined up with them. Well, that wasn't the right political thing to do, so he just sort of kept a background seat for a long time in Rome, and finally was taken into this little group of poets who were, they were gathered together by a man named Maecenas, and Maecenas was the National Committee for the Humanities and Arts wrapped into one person. He had a lot of money, he had a lot of influence, and he was a very dear friend of Octavian, who by this time is Augustus Caesar. He took on this name, the divine Augustus Caesar. And so in 23, Antony's dead, Cleopatra is dead, Caesar's dead, Octavian, Augustus is the head of what is going to become the Roman Empire. And Horace wrote a poem about Cleopatra. And I love this poem because it's contemporary. It's not 200 years later that he wrote this poem. He may have met her, who knows. He probably saw her. She lived in one of Caesar's villas across the river from the Capitoline Hill. And perhaps, who knows, he may have actually spoken with her. So here it is. This is from Book 1 of the Odes of Horace, and this is Ode 37. And I looked this up just today just to see on Google. This is one of his most famous poems. I had no idea that everybody knows this poem, apparently. Has anybody ever read this poem? Margaret, have you read this? No? So, anyway, Ode 37, Cleopatra. At last the day has come for celebration, for dancing and for drinking, bringing out the couches with their images of gods, adorned in preparation for the feast. Before today, it would have been wrong to call for the festive Caecuban wine from the vintage bins. It would have been wrong while that besotted queen, with her vile gang of sick, polluted creatures, crazed with hope and drunk with her past successes, was planning the death and destruction of the empire. But comrade, she came to and sobered up, when not one ship, almost of all her fleet, escaped unburned, and Caesar saw to it that she was restored from madness to a state of realistic terror. The way a hawk chases a frightened dove, or as a hunter chases a hare across the snowy steppes, his galleys chased this fleeing queen, intending to put the monster prodigy into chains and bring her back to Rome. But she desired a nobler fate than that. She did not seek to hide her remnant fleet in a secret harbor, Nor did she, like a woman, quail with fear at the thought of what it is the dagger does. She grew more fierce as she beheld her death. Bravely, as if unmoved, she looked upon the ruins of her palace, bravely reached out and touched the poison snakes, and picked them up, and handled them, and held them to her so her heart might drink its fill of their black venom. In truth, no abject woman she scorned in triumph to be brought in galleys, unqueened, across the seas to Rome to be a show.
Good evening. My name's Dennis Taylor, and I'm a past member of the Library Foundation Board of Directors and a past president. And I've also had the privilege of serving on this library board of trustees. When I first came to Helena, I was a Vista volunteer in 1972, and I lived in the electric block, which was now where our parking structure is. And coming to this library gave me great solace. It was over where Grand Street Theater is today, and the reading room like we're in tonight was my living room because I had a one-room apartment in the electric block, so I would go over there and I would feel at home. I grew up as a military kid, and we moved a lot, especially during my elementary years, and so my dad would do is whenever we got to our new base, he would take us to a library, and he'd get us all of my brother, my sister, and me a library card, and then we knew we were home. So I'm always at home in a library, but I'm especially at home in this particular library because it's been so much fun to see it become this library and to be excited about the library that will soon become as we renovate and expand. So thank you all for coming tonight. I worked the last 8 months with Mayor Collins, and it was a joy. I learned so much from him. He's a wonderful addition to our city commission, our governance structure, and been a wonderful citizen. He's got a great story that you can read tonight. But as frequently happens with mayors, he's not able to attend tonight. But as frequently happens at Lewis and Clark Library, we had a willing substitute, and her biography I will read because she wrote it, and because it's not in your handout, and because she'll be giving us our next poem. Trish Sternberg is our Lewis and Clark Library Administrative Manager. She was born several years ago, not dead yet, or not yet dead, lover of books, lover of poetry, and especially read aloud. She came to Helena in her 18th birthday, and here she found beautiful skies and trees and mountains, a big, loud family, and a wonderful library where she currently works. We were able to work together when we worked at the Legislative Council a very long time ago, and I've enjoyed working with her and near her for all of my time in Helena. Trish.
Thank you. I'm sorry that Mayor Collins couldn't join us, but I'm really tickled to have been asked to read tonight. I only had about 3 hours to get nervous, and I didn't think I would be this nervous, but I am. The poem that I chose, or that was chosen when I was asked to read, my office mate said, do instructions. It'll be perfect. It's a poem that I memorized for a friend when we decided that we weren't going to be gifting each other with things anymore. So I memorized this poem and read it and presented it to her on her birthday one year. People are probably familiar with Neil Gaiman. He is a wonderful author of novels. He writes comics, he does short stories, and he does poetry. And when he talks about this poem, he has you imagine that you have suddenly stepped into a fairy tale. And what would be more helpful than maybe some instructions? Touch the wooden gate in the wall you never saw before. Say please before you touch the latch. Go through, walk down the path. A red metal imp hangs from the green painted front door as a knocker. Do not touch it, it will bite your fingers. Walk through the house. Take nothing, eat nothing. However, If any creature tells you that it hungers, feed it. If it tells you that it is dirty, clean it. If it cries to you that it hurts, if you can, ease its pain. From the back garden, you will be able to see the wild wood. The deep well you walk past leads down to winter's realm. There's another land at the bottom of it. If you turn around here, you can walk back safely. You will lose no face. I will think no less of you. Once through the garden, you will be in the wood. The trees are old. Eyes peer from the undergrowth. Beneath a twisted oak sits an old woman. She may ask for something. Give it to her. She will point the way to the castle. Inside it are 3 princesses. Do not trust the youngest. Walk on. In the clearing beyond the castle, 12 months sit around a fire warming their feet, exchanging tales. They may do favors for you if you are polite. You may pick strawberries in December's frost. Trust the wolves, but do not tell them where you are going. The river can be crossed by the ferry. The ferryman will take you. The answer to his question is this. If he hands the oar to his passenger, he will be free to leave the boat. Only tell him this from a safe distance. If an eagle gives you a feather, keep it safe. Remember, the giants sleep too soundly, that witches are often betrayed by their appetites. Dragons have one soft spot somewhere, always. Do not be jealous of your... Oh, wait, I missed a line. Damn, and it was the best when I'm starting this paragraph over. If an eagle give you a feather, keep it safe. Remember that giants sleep too soundly, that witches are often betrayed by their appetites. Dragons have one soft spot somewhere always. Hearts can be well hidden, and you betray them with your tongue. Do not be jealous of your sister. Know that diamonds and roses are as uncomfortable when they tumble from one's lips as toads and frogs. Colder, too, and sharper, and they cut. Remember your name. Do not lose hope that what you seek will be found. Trust ghosts. Trust those that you have helped to help you in their turn. Trust dreams, trust your heart, and trust your story. When you come back, return the way you came. Favors will be returned, debts repaid. Do not forget your manners. Do not look back. Ride the wise eagle, you shall not fall. Ride the silver fish, you will not drown. Ride the gray wolf, hold tightly to his fur. There is a worm at the heart of the tower. That is why it will not stand. When you reach the little house, the place where your journey started, you will recognize it, although it will seem much smaller than you remember. Walk up the path and through the garden, gate you never saw before but once, and then go home, or make a home, or rest.
Thank you, Trish. That was great. Before I introduce Lauren Graham, I would like the members of the Library Foundation Board to stand, if you would please. In place would be best. So, we have 15 board members, and Pichette is our vice president. And these people work hard to raise money and promote the library and make a great library even better. So thank you. Lauren Graham is our third reader. He is a poet. He teaches English and poetry at Carroll. He grew up in Oklahoma, and he has some Native American blood in his ancestry, which I find interesting because that's one of my hobbies. He's kind of a man of the South. He's gone to schools and taught at colleges from Texas and Oklahoma to Virginia. But he may be best known, and his most recent claim to fame is the mentor of Virginia Reeves. So I say that because when we did an event last year called A Writer's Journey, Virginia very wonderfully shared how she got to where she was the author of a novel shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize. And Lauren was one of those people she said helped her along the way. So we're glad you're here, Lauren. Come on up. One more thing. I did ask him, why do you write poetry? And he said, because I'm only happy when I write poetry.
Seemed like a good reason to me. I'm going to read one poem of mine from this book right here, and I don't think it needs a lot of explanation, but the whole book is about a family in poverty, and it's from the point of view of the kid who tries to figure things out and usually can't, but some things he does figure out, and I think in this poem he kind of figures things out. It's called Episode of the Encyclopedia Salesman. I knew better than to ask for things we couldn't afford, and even at 7 had taught myself not to want them. But I wanted those books with the red rectangles on their spines, Collier's, huge black volumes that the stranger extracted from his black case and lined up on our linoleum. I knew Grandma thought he had a gun in there, what she always thought about strangers, like this one in shiny black shoes and white shirt and dark tie, who sat on the flowered yellow kitchen chair next to our coal stove. And I knew Dad would say, no, we can't pay for them. And Mom would say, no, they're free at the library. That my smart aleck cousin would say, why don't you show us some big heavy books? I was wrong, though. Dad looked straight at me. There's an old car I could overhaul that would bring the money if you think you could use these. The room got quiet. I waited for Uncle Fred to say something like, hell, if he reads all them, he'll be pert near smart as me. But the silence held, a first in that house. So I just mumbled, yes, sir, I expect I could. As though I had no idea, even at 7, of what my yes, sir meant to everyone present. Another month of beans, less coal for the fire. My father spending his winter evenings with a drop light in the unheated barn he used for a garage. The real price of privilege, its great black bulk.
Thank you very much. One of the newest members of the Library Foundation is Riley Meredith, and he's something that I've always wished I could be, and I'll never, ever, my kids assure me be, and that's a Montana native. And what I'm especially always encouraged by Montana natives who were born and raised in Helena, and then after going away and being in school, studying creative writing and honors program at the University of Montana, going off to University of Wales to continue studying creative and critical writing, and finally studying for a doctoral work in creative and critical writing at the University of Sussex. He met his wife, Danelle. They have 2 children, and then they came back here after spending some time being in marketing and writing and working for the gaming industry in Las Vegas. I'm told that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, so unless it's part of your poem, we'll leave it at that. But we're so glad that you came back home, and we're glad that you're on our Library Foundation Board, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Riley Meredith.
So I'm not going to read any original poetry. I haven't written poetry for an awfully long time. I know my mother's going to be disappointed. She's sitting over there. I did shill the crowd a little bit. But when I was in Brighton working on my doctorate in writing, I met a fellow writer named Abby Curtis, and she was an incredible writer. She was a far better writer than I will ever be, and an amazing poet. She was, I think, the first person I ever met who didn't have a middle name. It was just Abby Curtis, and you'd ask her what her middle name was, and she said, "I don't have one." And the thing I think I most loved about Abby's writing, and just about Abby herself, was she seemed to be able to look at things in the world and imagine herself as those things, not just other people, but it could have been the sea, it could have been a dog she saw on the street. She had a way of becoming other things around her and writing about them. She's published 2 works of poetry and 2 novels now. And so this is a poem from her second collection of poetry, which is called The Glass Delusion. And I'll read a little background about how the poem came about. On a visit to the Natural History Museum, Abby came across an amazing video of Alice Shirley, an artist creating a life-size painting of Archie, the giant squid, using the medium of squid ink. She was captivated both by the incredible preserved specimen of the squid itself and by Alice's talent. She contacted Alice, hoping to write a poem about her and about this wonderful creature. Alice was warm and friendly and went out of her way to help Abby with the project. Abby got to see Archie in the Darwin Center along with all manner of other pickled creatures. She spent a lot of time researching the squid, its biological, historical, and literary origins, and the resulting poem is in her second collection, The Glass Delusion. So this poem is called Squidity. She clutches a tub of fresh squid ink from Brixton Fisheries. They let her through the airlock into the tang of formalin. Halogen replaces sunlight. She spreads a ream of paper as an explorer spreads her map. She'll stay 8 days, surrounded by the spoils of Darwin's beagle, a library of creatures preserved in amber glass. Their faces, preserved in amber green, their faces pressed against the glass. 3D liquid photographs, a dolphin fetus with a secretive half smile, iguana curled around the windows of its iridescent scales, unfinished hippopotamus, soft-rolled hooves and clunky grin, a potted auditorium in the pickled stillness. But she's here for Archie in the center tank, fallen god laid out, a toppled totem in the green, a small car's length, her edges curled, as if washed up, discovered on a cloud-white beach. This carcass she will duplicate and quicken with a willow wand dipped in briny ink, a skein of squid. The deflated body hides the hubcap eyes. Imagine, as she died, her tentacles uncoiled, a conjurer's gesture. Now reclining dreamless, sealed in a sample of the other world, she pulses through the artist's sleep, pulling the sea right through her, reeling out parts of herself, the coalescing of ink touched by water, a burst of the inexplicable, twizzling within an ordinary thought. On the last drawing day, a catch of fear as willow touches paper, an image of a parachute collapsing in the blackest water. The color seeps from the artist's skin and renders the material of Archie's flesh. She adds touches to the suckers, the shadows of their tiny teeth. She can almost feel the body through the glass, supple and resistant, almost see it breathe as she leaves the room, paper rolled under her arm, to be unraveled in the daylight.
Thank you, Reddy. That was remarkable. If you look at our list of readers, the next one is Helen Fandrich, who unfortunately is our second cancellation. She came down with laryngitis.
She's here.
Oh, Helen.
She's not able to speak.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize you were here.
It's all right.
Well, I was told you had laryngitis, which you would need for tonight. Do you want to go ahead, or?
John
All
has
right.
graciously said.
All right. We'll have John come up. I'll give a brief introduction for John.
Sure.
John is our library director. He came from Illinois, worked his way all the way to Oregon, where he was the manager of a big branch library. Before that, he was in Anaconda, Montana, my hometown, at the Hearst Free Library, which probably prepared him for all the greatness he's since achieved, I imagine. But he came back to Helena. He married up when he married into the Meredith family, who have their whole row and have one of the readers tonight. And John is really doing an outstanding job here. I served with the previous library director and thought, I don't know if anyone can be as good as Judy was, but John has been better and has led the community to great plans for Helena. So glad you're able to read Helen's poem.
And I'll add that Helen's actually our newest library board member, and we're very happy that she's on board with us. And Helen is stepping right up. She is the board representative to our construction team. So all of the plans that we're making for the remodel of this library, Helen has a front row seat for that, and we thank you for stepping up and doing that. So I'll read Helen's selected poem, and then she has typed up a little story about the poem. So the poet is an anonymous poet, actually, but the poem is called Little Things. It's just the little homely things, the unobtrusive, friendly things, the won't you let me help you things that make our pathway light. And it's just the jolly joking things, the never mind the trouble things, the laugh with me, it's funny things that make the world seem bright. For all the countless famous things, the wondrous record-breaking things, those never can be equaled things that all the papers cite, aren't like the little human things, the everyday encountered things, the just because I like you things that make us happy quite. So here's to all the simple things, the dear, all in a day's work things, the smile and face your troubles things, that trust God to put them right, the done and then forgotten things, the can't you see I love you things, the hearty I am with you things that make life worth the fight. This poem was given to me by a dear friend, Margaret Chivers, a pioneer Helena businesswoman. She was born in 1910, graduated from Helena High in 1928, and was given a full college scholarship, which she had to turn down in order to go to work to provide for her widowed mother and younger sister. Scholarships were rarely given to women at that time, so it was quite an achievement. Margaret then went to work for Collins Land Company on 6th Avenue in Helena, where the parking garage currently stands. Working there her entire adult life, eventually inheriting the business from Mr. and Mrs. Ted Collins in the early 1960s. The Collins Land Company was established in 1889 by Jeremiah Collins, who first went into journalism, founding the Fort Benton River Press in 1878, and later the Great Falls Tribune in 1885. The company dealt with public lands, bought and sold land scrip, and represented clients before the Department of the Interior with regard to public lands. It was so successful that the Collins opened a branch office in Washington, D.C. in 1901. It was one of the largest land scrip dealers in the U.S. and continued in the business until 1957, when Congress discontinued the use of land scrip. The company had expanded into the insurance business in 1910, and that portion of the business increased steadily as the land scrip business declined. Mr. and Mrs. Ted Collins had one son, Jack, who was killed in World War II. After his death, Ted Collins went into deep depression and was no longer able to run the business. He died in 1956. Margaret began managing the business, serving as owner and president of the company until 1974, when she closed the business and sold all of its property on 6th Avenue and up around the corner on Park Avenue to Helena's Urban Renewal Program. Margaret was a charter member of Seroptimist International of Helena in April 1944, serving in all local offices more than once, and in several state and regional offices. The local SI of Helena is celebrating 75 years this month and has established annual scholarship fund with an endowment left by Margaret. Margaret passed away in Helena on December 7th, 2000. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Helena.
She must have been your landlady.
I'm sure. I had so many landladies, that's a whole other story. I think I was addicted.
Only the electric block where you live.
Yeah, it would be 1970, yes. It was. I was sad to see the electric block go, but thank you for your voice, and thank you, John, for giving voice to Helen's wonderful poem. I was talking with Captain Rob Lawler, who's our next presenter. He and his wife, Tiffany, managed the Salvation Army here in Helena, but like many of us, we followed our parents as we grew up from places all across the country. So Rob was raised in Washington, Virginia, and Idaho. He lived in Oklahoma, Texas, California, Wyoming, and now we're fortunate to have him and his family here in Helena. He studied for the ministry. He got his degree in social work. He found his calling with the Salvation Army over almost 30 years ago. And I love the idea that he met his partner, his wife, at camp. It was a Salvation Army camp, and they've been married together for over 21 years. They love Montana. They love all the things that Montana brings your family, and I'm looking forward to hearing from him and his poem. But I would just say that over the years, I've worked with the Salvation Army here in Helena, and they do such a tireless and wonderful job. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you, Captain, and let's thank you for all that you do.
All right, thanks for having me. I'm going to break the mold. I'm going to read 2 poems, short, but I'm also going to wear a costume. All right. So my poems are from Salvation Army Nature. One is from the founder, William Booth, in 1865. And this particular poem is actually taken out of a speech in which he addressed people 3 months before he passed away. Matter of fact, 7,000 people. And a little interesting fact that when William Booth passed away, the founder of the Salvation Army, there were over 40,000 people at his funeral, including Queen Mary. And so this is kind of the heart of William Booth. While women weep as they do now, I'll fight. While little children go hungry as they do now, I'll fight. While women go to prison, in and out, as they do now, I'll fight. While there's a drunkard left, while there is a poor lost girl upon the streets, while there remains one dark soul without the light of God, I'll fight to the very end. My next poem is from a guy that, Anthony Blake, I don't really actually know him, but he posted this, or copyright, 2015, and it kind of describes a little bit more. The Salvation Army who helps people who think they are alone, representatives with intervention who let it be known. It is the season to give, a time to open one's heart. It's the holiday cheer in making its mark, turning winter into warmth and turning cold into shelter of behold, serving hot food to homeless and watch as it unfolds. Holiday spirit put into homeless cheer, never be alone, nor have fear. The Star of Bethlehem and trademark in helping homeless preserver, putting clean clothes on the homeless from previous. A time for all those to rejoice, a moment to share in what we have, a tyke to reflect and be thankful. It doesn't matter if you're young or old, it's the matter of sustaining life and take hold. It's the matter, it doesn't matter, it's a matter of sustaining life and take hold. It's have determination and be bold. It's about giving and sharing. The mission is about caring. The Salvation Army having a mission of their own, as the snow falls and the holiday songs being the call, the joy to earth and peace on earth. The Salvation Army being hope and enriching homeless with a new everlasting and encouraging birth. And so that might remind you of Christmas and us. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Very good. Our next reader is Helena Civic. And I haven't pointed out anybody's bio yet, but I do want you to look at Hannah's. First of all, she's been an avid reader and writer her entire life. She's 17. But look at the bio. She is very involved in the Helena community. She's involved in local politics. She teaches Helena's children in East Helena. She has been a musician. She is a musician who teaches at camp. She wants to pursue a career in psychology and political science, and all the while continuing to use reading and writing as a tool of expression. She's 17. When I was 17, I was working on getting rid of my acne. And so I think we have a lot to look forward to. Hannah's proud parents are both in the audience. And you can raise your hands, just so they know where this prodigy came from. When I asked Hannah why she writes poetry, she said, "It's one of the best ways I can express myself, and it is my favorite tool of expression." So we're very glad you're here, Hannah. It is so great to hear from someone at your end of the spectrum here. So come on up.
Thank you. I'm really, really excited to be here. So the first poem I'm going to read is probably my all-time favorite poem. And I first read it when my freshman year, my best friend came up to me and said, "Hannah, you have to read this poem. It's the absolute worst thing I've ever read in my whole life." And so I was obviously very intrigued. And so I read it and I thought about it and I realized that I absolutely loved it. And I also realized that it's one of those poems that is either so very false or so very true. And so I thought I would read it and kind of let you decide where you stand on it. This is The Genius of the Crowd by Charles Bukowski. There is enough treachery, hatred, violence, absurdity in the average human being to supply any given army on any given day. And the best at murder are those who preach against it. And the best at hate are those who preach love. And the best at war, finally, are those who preach peace. Those who preach God need God. Those who preach peace do not have peace, and those who preach love do not have love. Beware the preachers, beware the knowers, beware those who are always reading books. Beware those who either detest poverty or are proud of it. Beware those quick to praise, for they need praise in return. Beware those quick to censure, they're afraid of what they do not know. Beware those who seek constant crowds, for they are nothing alone. Beware the average man, the average woman. Beware their love. Their love is average, seeks average, but there is genius in their hatred. There is enough genius in their hatred to kill anybody. Not wanting solitude, not understanding solitude, they will attempt to destroy anything that differs from their own. Not being able to create art, they will not understand art. They will consider their failure as creators only as a failure of the world. Not being able to love fully, they will believe your love to be incomplete. And then they will hate you. and their hatred will be perfect. Like a diamond, like a knife, like a mountain, like a tiger, it will be their finest art. Thank you. And then on a very different note, I'm going to read a portion of a poem by Sarah Kay called If I Should Have a Daughter, that I think is one of the most beautiful, uplifting poems, different than Bukowski. If I should have a daughter, instead of mom, she's going to call me Point B. Because that way she knows that no matter what happens, at least she can always find her way back to me. I'm going to paint the solar systems on the backs of her hands, so that she has to learn the entire universe before she can say, oh, I know that like the back of my hand. And she's going to learn that this life will hit you hard in the face, wait for you to get back up just so that it can kick you again in the stomach. But getting the wind knocked out of you is the only way to remind your lungs how much they like the taste of air. There is hurt, fear that cannot be fixed by Band-Aids or poetry. So the first time she realizes that Wonder Woman isn't coming, I'll make sure she knows she does not have to wear the cape all by herself. Because no matter how wide you stretch your fingers, your hands will always be too small to catch all the pain you want to heal. Believe me, I have tried. There will be days like this. And there will be days like this, my mama said, when you open your hands to catch and wind up with only blisters and bruises. When you step out of the phone booth and try to fly and the very people you want to save are the ones standing on your cape. When your boots will fill with rain and you'll be up to your knees in disappointment, and those are the very days you'll have more reasons to say thank you. Because there's nothing more beautiful than the way the ocean refuses to stop, kissing the shoreline no matter how many times it's sent away. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Hannah's dad was born on the same day as my oldest daughter, so there's been a Miskevich in my life almost the whole time I've been in. I worked with her grandfather as well. Beware of readers. Well, for about 30 years, there was a gentleman who I used to share a breakfast table with from across the room at the No Sweat Cafe. And he was a professor of theater. He was a poet. I saw him in a play at Grand Street Theater, and he played Willie Loman, and he broke my heart. I just felt the pain and loneliness of this traveling salesman. Later, when Myrna Loy was about ready not to be able to make it, he stepped in and took over and rejuvenated and revitalized this institution we love so much. And if that wasn't enough for a lifetime, a poet, a player, an actor, a teacher, a leader, he ran for the Helena City Commission, and for the last 8 months, I've been able to meet with him every other week and learn so much about him, about his family, and also about this community. He's a tireless worker, and one of the joys of working with Commissioner Ed Noonan was that almost every other time he would either read to me one of the poems that he just wrote about something that we may have just experienced together, or something he thought about in the middle of the night. And so I have a bunch of these that I collected while I was working with him, and thanks to being introduced to him as the poet that he is, I've been reading backwards over his lifetime of being a poet, and I'm hoping that he'll read his poetry for us tonight. Commissioner Ed Noonan.
I will read my poetry, although after listening to Captain Lawler, I was tempted to shift to Rachel Lindsay's General William Booth Enters into Heaven, one of my favorite poems. Booth led boldly with the big bass drum. Poetry has been a gift to me. I'm not sure exactly how it works. I'll have long spells of not writing a poem, and then suddenly I'm writing them. I had a really powerful experience starting in September, and I wrote a series of 10 poems. I called them journal entries. The poems reflected on a strong personal voice that had a lot more surety than at different times of my life I'd ever thought I'd reach. I'm going to read the last 2 poems because they do kind of balance each other out a bit. Poems have been circling in my head since the beginning of the year. I thought I was trying to catch several poems, but all the music was one poem, a poem with a reoccurring theme, the reality of the arrival of death. I'm not afraid of dying, maybe a little, but can't help speculating, and all the noise of words that represent the reality of potential death drown out the other sounds, circle back and come around to roost in the same place, like an inevitable rendezvous with fate. That's one example. Let me give you another. I love the world I live in, the 3-dimensional, touchable world around me, the top-tier A-tour theater with ongoing performances, major stories, little poignant snippets, tragic epics, funny anecdotes I get to hear or watch or perform, a world of always beautiful, colorful, authentic design. Right now, my neighborhood and my world is 1 month into winter with the older trees and shrubs encouraging the new growth to hold up against the cold. Having survived worse winters, the elder living plants encourage the young to hold on to the anticipation of spring's renewal. See what I mean? The line of thought brought me back to another metaphor for death, at least an optimistic one. This gets old fast. Let's try another direction. I am happy, often a rare commodity to claim. I love and am loved. I grow and learn and often see things rarely noticed. I do have a problem. I can't help being a teacher. Once I experience something, I automatically begin to figure out how to teach others to experience. Genetic compulsion I can't avoid. Did it again. Catch the pattern? Underneath whatever I'm thinking lurks language leading to suggestions of death, an inevitable consideration. See how annoying? Let's try another approach. I love my poetry, constantly being created by different, diverse parts of myself. I sit up at night and listen to what those busy parts have written and try to remember enough to capture the language I am given. Often the many poetic parts of myself resent me if I don't act indebted just because I get the final edit. Grrr. What did I tell you? This poem is long, but let's keep going. Knowing it will end, just not when. Okay, I did that one on purpose. Next, I honor organizations that people create, like the United States of America with its good intentions. May it live forever. Or the National Performance Network, NPN, which I miss, with its unabashed, unashamed, and unflappable artists who help me rejoice in my own first-person voice. Hanging around NPN and its various confines, I turn a corner and find another performance installation surrounding me, reminding me now is all the time I've got. Try to ignore that sneaky, less than optimistic interjection. Moving on, I willingly embrace the Catholic Church. On this one, I see people looking at me, shaking their heads, wondering how I can love an institution so flawed by humans who often turn the call to love into pain over and over again. Be careful, head shakers. The teacher and me will launch into a long historic treatise, considerations how human life subject to its own fallibility ends in resurrection. Ha! Getting the sneaky impression. Death's the fourth driving intention. I could go on. Yikes. Suggestion of death's approach lurks around every corner. I'd better stop. I will finish this poem, period, silence, it's over, arg. I can't escape. And this last shorter poem, though it does balance that one out. I'm quite taken with myself. I think I'm hot, other people do not. See me as I see myself. I walk into a room, catch my reflection, and I'm dizzy, stumbling, falling into my arms. I catch myself, and hands around my waist, I and myself are waltzing, nose to nose, eye to eye, breathing heavy. Other people notice, nodding, smiling, ah, true romance. But I paid no attention, I'm in love, absorbed in finally finding myself. I fumble with my words and ask myself to marry me. I gasp to hear myself say yes. Lifted off the floor, I and myself keep dancing.
Thank you, Ed. That was wonderful, to say the least. Judge Jim Reynolds is our next reader. And Jim is a University of Montana Law School graduate, has been in Helena for a long time and practiced. And currently he is a judge with the 1st Judicial District covering Lewis and Clark and Broadwater County. But Jim is overseeing something very unique, in my opinion. Since 2011, he's presided over the the Adult Drug Treatment Court since 2011, and the Family Drug Treatment Court since 2017. And one time I was one of several people who were in a conversation with Jim about this court. And one of the stories he told stuck with me, and I'm probably going to get the details wrong, which is fine. It's the point of the story that I think is important. There was a fellow that came before the court, and he had a long history of drug addiction and crimes, and in this court, Jim and the staff take the time to understand the people who are brought before them and their backgrounds and how they got in front of this diversion court. And this fellow, I think, had a typical story. And so Jim and his staff say, well, what do you need to be successful? How can we help you? And this man very reluctantly, I think he was in his 30s, admitted that he didn't know how to read. So imagine how that might have played out in the life of this man. So, after some objections and protestations from this man, I can't do this, I'm too old, they arranged for this man to be enrolled in an adult literacy class. And he learned to read and write. And this took a long time, but Jim and his staff stuck with this guy. Well, what was the next step? Well, I need a job. Okay, great. There's all kinds of jobs. We'll have to get one. He says, well, I don't know how to drive. I don't have a driver's license. Well, of course, if you can't read, how could you ever possibly have a driver's license? So they got him hooked up with a driver's ed course, and he learned how to drive. And eventually, I think the story went that this particular man was successful. He avoided repeating his past history. But to me, this is the kind of man that Jim Reynolds is, who sees a way to change people's lives through a positive use of the judicial system. And I'm really glad that he's here and he's going to read. I will say that Jim and I, my wife, Jim and his wife, have been neighbors for 27 years, across the fence from each other. We share these lovely spruces between us. And I can say I have never once had to call the police on him for any reason. So, come on up, Jim.
All right, you may all be seated. Old habit. I've got an admission to make. I've known Joe. He's been my next door neighbor for 27 years. I came to Helena with Dennis Taylor back in 1972. I was a VISTA volunteer. Dennis and his wife were VISTA volunteers. We all three arrived here for a one-year assignment. And here we are 47 years later, and they can't get rid of us, apparently. So anyway, I'm very honored to be here. Some people have commented on their connection to the library. I have a connection to libraries in general. My wife, Nikki Waherty, was a high school librarian for Helena High School for 30 years. After she retired, she had a little bit difficulty retiring, so she came down here and she volunteered at the Lewis and Clark Library for a period of time, worked here for a period of time, and is now on the board of trustees for the library here. You know, so we've got a really tight connection to libraries. Our home is a library. Nikki collects books. I think they stick to her fingers. She touches them and they end up in our house. So I'm really honored to be married to Nikki. You know, it's been a really good relationship, good solid marriage. She would be here tonight, but she's in Casper with her mother. I have to admit, poetry, some folks have said poetry is natural to them. Poetry does not come naturally to me. I dreaded poetry in school. I didn't write poetry well. I'm a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for 40 years now. There is no poetry in law. And so poetry doesn't come naturally to me. The last time I remember reciting a poem was in the 4th grade. I had to memorize and recite a poem in front of the class, and I chose "O Captain, My Captain," a poem by Walt Whitman about the death of Abraham Lincoln. And I haven't checked lately, but I think for a while I was in the Guinness Book of World Records for the fastest recitation of a poem in history. I mean, 4th grade kids are calling out to me, "Slow down!" You know, I recited that poem. So that's the last time I remember writing or reading a poem in public. So when Joe called me and asked if I would do this, I got nervous. I thought, okay, what do I do? Do I go light? Maybe something by Ogden Nash, you know, "If called by a panther, don't answer." Or go dark, you know, Edgar Allan Poe, "Once upon a midnight dreary while I pondered a weak and weary." You know, those are the ones that I know about. I even thought briefly about going risque. There was a young lad from Nantucket. And then I thought, maybe not the right audience for that one, so I left that one out. So I decided to go with a Nobel laureate. So I have a poem by Robert Zimmerman. Some of you may know him as Bob Dylan. I first heard this poem in 1965, and I listened to it with the ears of a 14-year-old, looked at my world around me, and it resonated with me quite a bit in 1965. I listened to it about every couple of months or so, and I have several different renditions of it, but it really resonated with me as a 14-year-old back in 1965, and it still resonates with me as a 67-year-old in 2019 for different reasons. I think there's cautions in the song or in the poem that we all need to keep in mind. You know, I look at it differently now than I did then, but this has been a poem that has sort of guided me through my life as I've tried to do the right thing as a person. All right, let's see if this can do this any slower than I did "O Captain, My Captain." All right. Come gather around people wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown. Accept it that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth saving, then you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, for the times they are a-changing. Come senators and congressmen, please heed the call. Don't stand in the doorway, don't block up the hall. For he that gets hurt will be he who has stalled. There's a battle outside and it's raging. It'll soon shake your windows and rattle your walls, for the times they are a-changing. Come mothers and fathers throughout the land, and don't criticize what you don't understand. Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. Your old road is rapidly aging. Please get out of the new one if you can't lend your hand, for the times they are changing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. So this is a commercial part of the time before we have our last presenter. This library is great because people work so hard to make it so. And one of the things that we do through the Library Foundation is we raise money to do things that simply aren't possible to be done by taxpayers' dollars. And so many of the things that you can be proud of, whether it's literacy devices for younger people or other things that we can't squeeze into our budget, it's been people like you who have been generous and given to the tax deductible nonprofit organization that the Library Foundation is. And so I just ask you, if you give it a certain period of time, some people give after tax day, some people give every month through a little donation, which you can do to the Library Foundation. People usually give at the end of the year, but when you're coming to make your giving this next year, I hope you will consider a generous gift to the Lewis and Clark Library Foundation. When I think about it, this is the most democratic place there is in our community. We lost our ballpark, so I can say that with certainty now. And really, if you come here, like when Food Chair gets turkeys before the holidays, you just get touched by the generosity of this community, but you also get overwhelmed by the nature of who actually comes here and uses our library. You know for a fact that that older gentleman with 16 books that he's putting back and that read every one of them, the little kid that's there with all of their books, the mom with her kids, the after school, you know, it's just amazing. And that's just one day I have witnessed for several years now, but it happens every day that you're in the library. Everybody can come here, no matter who you are. This is a safe, welcoming place for people. As long as you behave yourself, you can stay here as long as you want. And the whole world is at your fingertips. If we don't have it here, there's a librarian who can get it for you in a matter of minutes, days, weeks. So whoever you are, whether you're one of the people that Judge Reynolds has to help learn how to read and find things, you can find the whole world for yourself right here in our library. So your donation will mean a lot. Now, the thing that Trish said earlier on, the thing I love about this particular event every April is the fact that we get to hear poetry, where most of us, at least for me, I've enjoyed poetry since I was very young, but I only enjoyed it between my ears. I never really realized that poetry was supposed to be said out loud. So that's what I love about this, is that people say, this is a poem that moves me. They're our friends, our neighbors' children, and they tell you what it means and they give voice to that. So I remember when I got out of the military, I was in San Francisco and I got to see Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who just turned 100 and is still working and writing, with Yves Yevtushenko, who was then a very popular and moving Russian poet, with Allen Ginsberg, all in one place at 10th and Howard in, say, 1974. And it was maybe one of the first times where I actually heard poetry read out loud by people who knew what they were talking about. And it just moved me so. And even here, if you go to the what is it called, the disc, there's a great little disc if you got a couple hours to go somewhere with Dylan Thomas saying his poems and why he says his poems. Just blows you away. So it's so cool that we get to do this every year and do it together. I was supposed to bring a poem and I forgot to bring it. I've been reading a lot of Donald Hall because he's a great poet for many years, and he also taught poetry. There's a great book about how to read poetry, which I recommend to you, and I maybe would have brought something by him, but I forgot to bring a poem. So my poem is this: a word is dead. Some say a word is dead when it is said. Some say, I say it just begins to live that day. And that's my kind of poem that Jim Reynolds would like, by Emily Dickinson. So our last presenter is Jill Roberts, and she, another born and raised in Helena. She got her BFA in musical theater, and I'm sure she danced and sang and acted her way across the country. She got to so many cities and she performed in so many venues and found herself in New York City. And of course, if that had happened to me in my life, I'd probably want to learn more about wine as well. So there she was in New York City, where you could find a good glass of wine or two, but it turns out that she made it into an art form, and she became, I want to say this right, sommelier? Very good. Yay! My daughter had me practice 5 times and not do the N that I had in it. But anyway, so she became an expert in wine, and she became so versed in the grape that, and she wrote about it. People had her write about their restaurants, and she went to all these cool restaurants and learned so much that she brought all of that talent back here to Helena, and she created the Hawthorne, this wine bar restaurant that we have here in town that is such a delightful addition to the the vitality on Last Chance Gulch. It just, the first time I went there, I thought, am I really in Helena? Anyway, so we're looking forward to our final act, and we know that you can do it. So you are going to help us close out the night with your poems. Thank you.
No pressure at all. I am honored, truly, to be here. There's so much energy in this room and lots of magic happening, so thank you for allowing me to be a part of it. I have chosen Litany, and I'm certain many of you know it, a classic love poem by Billy Collins. For those of you who aren't familiar with this lighthearted and lovely poet, Billy Collins, he was born in New York City in 1941. His work is an accessible and playful view of humanity, usually riddled with sarcasm and dry wit. A litany can be defined as a tedious recital or repetitive series. With this work, he borrows a few lines from another poet and proceeds to improve upon this poet's classic style of using repetitive lines and comparison metaphors to flatter his lover. Mr. Collins uses a slightly mocking and playful tone and reminds us all not to take everything so seriously. The Belgian poet Jacques Criquillon started his poem with the two lines: "You are the bread and the knife, the crystal goblet and the wine." Litany. You are the bread and the knife, the crystal goblet and the wine. You are the dew on the morning grass and the burning wheel of the sun. You are the white apron of the baker and the marsh bird suddenly in flight. However, you are not the wind in the orchard, the plums on the counter, or the house of cards. And you're certainly not the pine-scented air. There's just no way that you are the pine-scented air. It is possible that you are the fish under the bridge, maybe even the pigeon on the general's head, but you're not even close to being the field of cornflowers at dusk. And a quick look in the mirror will show that you are neither the boots in the corner nor the boat asleep in its boathouse. It might interest you to know, speaking of the plentiful imagery of the world, that I am the sound of the rain on the roof. I also happen to be the shooting star, the evening paper blowing down an alley, and the basket of chestnuts on the kitchen table. I am also the moon in the trees, and the blind woman's teacup. But don't worry, I am not the bread and the knife. You are still the bread and the knife. You will always be the bread and the knife. Not to mention the crystal goblet, and somehow, the wine. Thank you.